Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining this call in the series of the COVID-19 Survey Working Group. My name is Dr. Eric Kennedy, and I helped coordinate this working group and bring these weekly sessions to you. It's great to have you with us, and I'm really excited for the program today. During today's session, we have a couple of visiting guest experts joining us from Angus Reid to discuss both their online panel work in general with public opinion research in the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as a really interesting project that they have underway at the moment in terms of doing antibody serosurveying. So trying to get a sense of to what degree the Canadian public has been exposed to and has been infected by the coronavirus pandemic. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation today and figuring out how these methods are blended together and some more of the nuance behind how things are done at Angus Reid. In terms of logistical updates for the group, there's just one thing of note, which is that we're reaching the holiday season and the end of the academic year. And so this will be our final session for the fall. We will be resuming in the middle of January. And so stay tuned for updates both via Twitter and via the email listserv with updates about when those sessions will be occurring and our roster of speakers for 2021. If you are not yet signed up on the listserv and watching this on YouTube or one of the other platforms, please do click on the link in the description where you can find out more information about the working group, how to join, and how to make sure that you get the invites to these meetings on a regular basis. Now, with that, I want to make sure that we reserve some time for our visiting experts today. We're really lucky to have Ed Murawski with us and Dimitri Iliopoulos joining us from Angus Reid to help walk us through some of the programming that they have in terms of COVID-19 survey research. I'll leave it to them to talk about the two different elements of their work. But as always, I'd encourage you to share your questions in the chat here on YouTube, and we'll integrate them into our conversation and interview. So thanks so much for joining us. And Ed and Dimitri, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks a lot, Eric. I'm going to have Dimitri share his screen so we have some visuals. Okay, well, hi everyone. Thanks for coming, and a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Eric, for inviting us. First introduction, I'm Ed Murawski. I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer of Angus Reid Group. And joining me is my colleague, Dimitri Iliopoulos, who's the SVP of Research and Client Service for our group. And today we thought, Eric asked us to comment a little bit on some of the work we've been doing in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we're more than happy to do. And so we'll talk a little bit about our perspective of conducting research during this time, along with a couple of case studies, just to sort of bring it to life for you a little bit as to how we see things and what we're doing. The two case studies that we're going to be talking about today is Dimitri is going to talk about the first case study, which is a tracking study that we put in place right in the beginning of the very early days, and have since done 27 waves of this research since early March, all conducted on our panel, which is entitled the Angus Reid Forum. The other piece of this that we're going to talk about, that I'll come back on and talk about, is the work that we did with Unity Health, which is a collaboration with St. Michael's Hospital here in Toronto and the University of Toronto Dalla Lana School of Public Health that came to us. So we're going to talk about both of those things. But I thought before we get into that, I think it's important for this group, which as I understand it is quite well versed in survey methods and survey research, talk a little bit about not necessarily who we are, but what I would call our primary engine for research. And that is what we call the Angus Reid Forum. And the Angus Reid Forum, to use industry parlance, is a panel. We call it a community, but it's basically the idea is it's a group of people that have agreed to work with us and to conduct research, i.e. share their opinions when asked with us. And the business, the Angus Reid Group business has been, we launched a business about 2.5 years ago. And the reason that Angus and I did that, Angus and I worked together for, well, a couple of decades now, is because we felt that there was a real need in the industry to focus on the data collection aspect of the research process. And in particular, as the world of digital communications is moving so quickly, And the way that humans interact and the way that humans talk to each other and communicate is moving so quickly that the way that we conduct research had to keep up with that. So the Angus Reid Forum is a digital panel. So that means that we communicate through all of our quote unquote members on that panel via email, social media, texting, multiple channels, which actually makes it somewhat unique to most of the other research panels out there that tend to be confined to the only mode of communication is via email, which is one of the areas that's becoming increasingly problematic when sampling and engaging with the population at large or subsamples of that population. The other aspect of why we wanted to do this was the construction of the panel and how we communicate with each other, but it was also how do we leverage a lot of the new technology that people now have in the ability and the ways that we communicate with each other. And the fact of the matter is that today, from a research perspective, we have the populations that we want to talk to, and the general population has the most powerful data collection device we've ever had in our history, which is notably the telephone. And so it's important to understand that a lot of the technology, some of which we designed in-house, some of which we licensed, was very cognizant of the fact that we know that when conducting online research, more than half of your respondents will be communicating to you via their telephone. And that is both a challenge in that it's a small screen, it limits the way and the types of questions that one can ask effectively, it affects the types of questions and the way that you word questions, and so forth. But also on the positive side, it also provides some real powerful tools for collecting data, most notably video, audio, ongoing dialogue, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what we sort of brought to bear with us on our panel. Dimitri, if you can go to the next slide, please. The 2 points of this panel, I don't want to belabor this for too long, but it's I've highlighted 2 of the areas here that I've circled in red. What's important to understand about our panel is that they are what we call known respondents. We know these people in the following sense. As we control the entire end-to-end process of the construction of this panel, including the recruitment of our respondents, we do all of that in-house. And all of our members have double opted in, have provided us with various forms of consent that we're able to communicate with them and reach out to them and talk to them. They've also provided us with a lot of information and on an ongoing basis about themselves. So we actually know a lot of information about them. We know demographic aspects of them. We know some of their behavioral traits. We know within a pretty small radius of where they are, where they reside, where they live, their household composition, and a lot of their attitudes, which is important for us to ensure representation on the panel to make sure that we're capturing as much of the Canadian online population as possible. So, and I do want to highlight that it is the Canadian online population, but that is north of 85% now of the Canadian population. So we feel fairly comfortable with that when talking about the representativity of Canadians as much as, or at least close to the ideal as possible. And the second aspect of this is that we spend a lot of time and a commitment to nurturing our members. We try and ensure that the engagements we ask them to participate in are not extremely long, boring surveys on lousy user interfaces that make the provision of data and the answering of questions difficult, cumbersome, technically awkward, that sort of thing. We keep our surveys to be short. We rarely do anything over 15 minutes. That would take anyone 15 minutes. Most of our surveys are 5 to 7 minutes in length. And we have a variety of techniques. If we need to get at more information, we can break them up and that sort of thing. As a result, we're quite proud of the fact that our response rates on our panels in Canada and the United States are in the neighborhood of 40%. What that means is that when we send out a request to 1,000 members, 40 to 45% of those members will respond and actually do the survey. This is considerably higher than most industry standards. In fact, we are unaware of any panel in the industry in North America that has response rates at that level. So it's just from a methodological standpoint, for us, it's a very important consideration. It's really at the heart of everything that we do. And we spend a lot of time nurturing and ensuring that we have the engagement of our members. And a lot of it comes down to the simple notion of respect, that we respect their time, we respect what they're doing. They're providing a valuable service to us by engaging with us, and so we do it. For those interested, by the way, our panel sizes in Canada, we have 80,000 members that we call active members that are on the panel. This is not just a database of email addresses. These are actual people who have conducted and are ongoing. We know when every time someone answers a survey. So our active panel members are actually true live people that are engaged with us, and we're at about 80,000 to date. In the United States, it's a lower number. It's about 20 to 25,000 literally as of this week. That is only because we only launched our US panel in August, and we're in the process of building it and using it, but it will surely go to the same numbers as the Canadians over time. So that's really at the heart of what we do. That's the engine that's driving what we're going to talk about today. So with that, I think we'll go to the first case study to Dimitri. And I just want to, as I was preparing for this and talking to you, it occurred to me that in early March, when COVID really came to North America, was actually, it seems now like eons ago. And it's important to get back in the frame of mind that we had back in early March. While we knew that COVID was happening, we didn't really understand the implications of what it meant when living in a place where COVID was beginning to spread. And those days in early March were really a time when the world turned upside down when we look back on it. And for us as a business, it was very tricky. And for our clients as a business, everything changed. Everybody at the time, I mean, when I say everybody, our clients, the people that we engage with, really were back to square one. We didn't know how to anymore. The rules of the game changed. How one communicates, how people are behaving, how people are thinking. It really radically changed in literally a heartbeat. And everybody was a bit of a loss. And to Dimitri's credit, immediately Dimitri said, well, the one thing that we have to do on our own dime, not selling it, not any of that, but just getting out there and understanding what exactly are Canadians thinking and how is this thinking evolving as the pandemic was evolving. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dimitri to talk a little bit about that particular initiative that we launched 9 months ago. Dimitri?
Great, thanks, Ed. Yeah, just to go over the story a little bit more, and I think, getting back to the original mindset is important, and just, a little bit about our business. I know the Angus Reid name tends to be associated with a lot of the public opinion releases that you'll see in the news, and that tends to be a lot of the work that's done by our sister organization, the Institute. But a lot of what we do for clients is for corporate Canada, for concept tests and advertising campaign assessments and brand health and landscape assessments. Is very traditional market research work. And so if you think about it from the perspective of all of these organizations, they accrue over a long period of time a really healthy understanding through market research of what Canadians are, what they do and what they prioritize and what their values are. And then of course COVID comes to Canada, which was March 12th, and we went into field on the 16th. But all of that goes out the window, of course, and so and if you remember the original lockdown, the messages we got, it was going to be at least from the school lockdown, we were going to be shutting down for a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, and obviously we know that that's not the case. But from our perspective, everything shut down. Everyone was shell shocked, and all projects closed and got deprioritized, and nobody really knew what to make of the situation. And then also everything that clients knew about the market had changed. So Canadians had reprioritized. Everyone was acting in a different way. Everyone was reprioritizing in a different way. So what are they supposed to do? And then, of course, they came to us with a lot of different questions, and we thought, the best thing that we could do is and knowing that this is a rapidly evolving situation, was to launch a monitor that first started on a weekly basis, and then we shifted it over after 4 or 5 months to a bi-weekly basis when we're still going. And the idea was really not to do a policy review or a political poll that talks about, Justin Trudeau's performance or anything like that. It was really to look at everyday behaviors, especially from a sector point of view. And we wanted to create this thing and to give it out to our clients and lots of other stakeholders as it was a free initiative, and we just wanted to help them get back on their feet like many other organizations were doing their part. So a little bit about the methodology then. So it was I said weekly, then went to bi-weekly. We're on wave 27. We just released last week. It was a representative sample of Canadian adults, and we balanced that nested by age and gender and region, and then education as a proxy for household income. And then from the perspective of what is it that we were trying to address. What was the market need and what were clients coming to us with? And as Ed mentioned before, it was really about getting back to basics. It wasn't about trying to how is this campaign going to look, or what do you think of this creative, or how's my brand doing? It was very basic stuff about what are Canadians thinking and feeling right now? How stressed out are they? How are they reacting emotionally? And then just understanding what are Canadians doing now that we're in lockdown mode? What is actually happening? And you look at it from the sector perspective of the from a transportation sector and the degree to which everybody stopped riding transit and stopped driving around as much, and so there's a financial dynamic of what's this doing to your personal finances, and the emergence of the necessity to have a nest egg, which is now a new priority. And we're seeing how Canadians are reprioritizing their finances. And then you go into online behavior and media consumption, and there's across all these sectors, there's some pretty dynamic shifts in the way people were behaving. And then of course, we wanted to get a little bit deeper on a sector by sector basis. And then of course the big issue that they came to us with, and obviously as in market research, we work very closely with marketing groups. And their question was, how are we supposed to communicate? Is it okay to still, put an ad out there? How are we supposed to talk to people? And what's the right way to do it? And so we looked at it within the monitor, and we looked at it on some deep dives outside of the monitor to sort of address what's exactly the right way to do it. And then, of course, the last component being the $1 million question, which is what's going to happen in the future. And that's what every business is asking, especially as it relates to, these new trends of priorities and behaviors. Which one of these are going to stick and which one of these are just going to go away? And so, we know that some things are going to go away, that people want to go, if they want to, shop local and they want to get into restaurants and things like that as soon as they can. But there's other things that we know that are going to stick, which are online grocery shopping and online shopping in general, and people wanting to work from home more. These are things that are going to stick. So, from a methodological point of view, and I'm happy to get into this further in the Q&A part, but there was a lot to have to juggle at this time. One being, we didn't have a baseline. We didn't know that this was going to come upon us. So all of these behaviors, that we measured across every sector, we had some, correlations here and there, but we never had done a study in this way where we wanted to have a benchmark of before and after the COVID tracker. And then, so then you get into the idea of, asking people about their behavior before and asking them whether they're doing things more or less. And that turns out to be very complicated. And it turns out that, it's difficult to ask that question, and respondents will often, drop the ball on you. And so you have to be very careful about how you ask those types of questions. The other thing is, and you might actually be able to see this in the graph there, is the volatility of the tracking. Keep in mind, you're looking at weekly tracking data. You can see some pretty volatile tracking graphs. And in all my time of research, doing tracking studies, you never see, things that move up and down in this way. And it tends to move up and down according, there is a story behind it. It's not that there's no rhyme or reason. It aligns very closely to what's happening, in Canada and across the world. Other considerations were, planting the seed for things that you have to track in the future. So what are some questions you want to ask now so that 6 months from now you can ask the same question and get something interesting? Trying to balance all the sectors and all the different deep dives. Luckily we were doing this on a bi-weekly basis, so if we missed something one week, we could get back into it the next. And then, of course, the difficult spot, and this has always been a difficult spot when it comes to market research, which is the predictive element, trying to understand what the future will be, what will people do in the future, and the degree to which people's responses about what they're going to do right now is actually reflective of their current emotional state, or whether it's going to be an ongoing state. So, I mean, a lot of it, you have to sort of juggle the difference between, I'm just feeling really cooped up right now and I can't wait to go out and shop local, or I'm tired of shopping at Amazon, so I can't wait to get to my local store. But is that a sort of a short-term a therapy from what's happening right now, or is it sort of a long-term trend? And so these are issues that we're looking to juggle. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of things to study. Fortunately, we never run out of subjects, and we're still going strong. One last note, and we'll flag it again at the end. There's going to be an email at the end of this that this is a free thing that we give out, and if you want to be on the distribution list to receive these reports, we're happy to make that available to you. So it'll be at solutions@angusreid.com, and that email will come at the end. So with that, I'll toss it back to Ed to talk about the ABC study.
Thanks, Dimitri. So the ABC study. So what if we go back again to those early days of March? Or it was actually sort of around the middle of March. We've been in the thralls of the pandemic for a couple of weeks, and it's hard to remember now. But at the time, there was an incredible level of uncertainty as to what was actually going on with the disease and with the health of Canadians. There was a lot of questions about the availability of testing. There was a lot of questions about the validity of the tests themselves and accessibility to those tests, and so forth and so forth. And I was sitting at home one night, and as was the rest of Canada, and at that time, and I got a text from a friend of mine who's not even in the business, not in the research business, and he sent me a text and he says, "Why aren't you guys going out and asking people whether or not they have COVID symptoms, to get a sense of how many people are actually experiencing an illness that could be COVID?" And I pondered this for a little bit that night, and I thought about it, and I sent a note to Angus, and then he got kind of turned on by that question. And we have a Angus Reid Institute, which is a not-for-profit. It's actually a charity that we have aligned with side by side, but a separate organization from the commercial business, the Angus Reid Group, where Dimitri and I work. And Angus, which we're very fortunate to have, because it really gives us great freedom to do work that we think is in the public interest, and stuff that we more from an academic nature, less of a commercial nature, that we want to do to understand what's going on out there with Canadians. And so within 24 hours, we launched a study very simply asking a representative sample of Canadians, have you experienced any of the following symptoms? And then understanding that, and then a couple of additional analytical questions, for example, comorbidities, accessibility to hospitals, testing, that sort of thing. And we took that, and we had to estimate a sort of a number, if you will, of people that had experienced COVID-like symptoms. We had no way of actually knowing whether or not they were just simply having a flu or a cold or something else, or if it was COVID. But we did that analysis, and we put it out, and we published it, as all the Angus Reid Institute's work is publicly available. It's at their website. You can go look at it, and all the data is there as well. So we did that within a week, and that immediately got picked up by a bunch of epidemiologists at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. And to their credit, they called us, and no disparaging of the academic community, but doesn't always move at the speed of light. And in this case, they really did. They jumped all over this, and they said, do you think it would be possible to crack the nut on that question, whether it's one thing to tell us what symptoms you have, but is it actually COVID? And furthermore, the best way to know that spread, and also as importantly, is what is the rate of immunization in the country, natural immunization that's occurring as a result of being exposed to the virus. And the only way to do that definitively, or as far as I know, is to actually do a blood test at the individual level basis. And they said, do you think we could do something similar and ask people to do a blood test? And we said, well, we don't know. We can try it. We've never asked our members to do something that's really, frankly, as invasive to their privacy as that is, or as a commitment to working with us at that level. But we said we'll give it a shot. The blood test, by the way, is a self-administered blood test at home. You get a kit, you put a prick in your finger, get a drop of blood, 4 drops of blood. You put it on a piece of paper, you put it in a sealed envelope, and you send it back to the hospital. That was the test. So we spent the next couple of weeks setting up all the infrastructure for this, because it was very important that we establish the credibility of who's asking and who's doing the testing, and furthermore, the importance of their participation. And just really trying to, reinforce that level of trust. And that required us to set up link pages and websites and 1-800 numbers and videos of what the test would be when they received the kit, and all that sort of thing in 2 languages, in English and French. And so we did that. We did that in quite quickly. If we go to the next slide, Dimitri, what ended up happening was, where we ended up with this was, the goal was to get 10,000 blood tests of a representative sample of Canadians, more or less. And I'll talk about that in a second. And so we created a sample frame within our panel, and we launched the study. And what ended up happening was, first of all, we got a higher than normal response rate. We had over 50% of members who were asked to participate in the symptom survey with the blood test request at the back end of it, and it filled out the survey. Of that 50% that filled out the survey, 71% said they agreed to the blood test and gave us their home address. It was a Canada Post form that one can get, and they gave us their home address. The kits then, and this is where I don't mean to get into too much detail, but it is kind of interesting because everyone kind of thinks this stuff is automatic and everyone has it at the ready. The St. Michael's Hospital had to get all the kits ready, to get 10,000 kits ready, and they literally had interns and other people working through the night to pull together these kits that then got mailed out through Canada Post to the people that agreed to do the test. And we didn't know how many would actually end up. We know how many people agreed to it, but how many people would actually do it and get it back and send it back. So we sent out more than 10,000 kits. The kits went out, and the people, and a fairly high proportion, over 65%, actually did the kits, and the kits came back to St. Michael's Hospital. The second part of this that's interesting is those kits then have to be tested. The early days of antibody testing were actually kind of sketchy. The tests were unvalidated, and they varied greatly in quality. There were literally hundreds of labs in the world that were willing to sell one or sell you a test, but not many of them were any good. They didn't have a high level of accuracy. And the Canadian government, to its credit, actually very quickly did an audit of tests and had a recommendation list of what tests they considered to be of the highest quality. St. Michael's Hospital ended up, and the University of Toronto ended up picking 2 tests. They did a double test on all of these blood samples. They did one test and they did the second test. The second test actually ended up being far more accurate than the first test. So we had to get all the labs ready to do all of this testing. When I say we, it wasn't really us, it was St. Michael's Hospital, to get all of the testing organized, to get it done. That testing is now complete. It was actually completed the first test was completed in August, September. The second test is just finished, and the results are going to get rolled out. What's important about this, even though we only have the results today, the blood test that people did on themselves was done in late April and early May. This is one, as far as we know, this is one of the few cases, and we've been told that in terms of getting a true population representative, or as representative as possible population, to do those tests in that time frame is pretty much unprecedented anywhere in the world. There were countries, most notably the United States had a couple of studies they did. One was done in California, another was done, I believe, in Connecticut. A third was done in New York City. Spain did a couple of antibody tests amongst their population as well. The problem there was twofold. Again, one was the representativity of the sample, which left a lot to be desired, particularly in the case of the California study, which they recruited off of Facebook, proved to be highly inadequate. And the second was the quality of the tests that people used to test the blood at that time. We felt pretty good about, or we feel pretty good about the fact that we were able to capture that sample of blood from individuals in the time frame that we did. And so I'm not going to belabor, I'm going to open it up to some Q&A. But just so everyone knows, the results of this study will be published very quickly. We know that the New England Journal of Medicine is looking to do a rush publication of the results. The team at St. Mike's and the UFT are putting together the paper now. The study has already been in various media sources, and I believe the Globe and Mail is coming out with a story next week on some of the preliminary results of the study, along with La Presse, hopefully in Quebec. We're trying to get them to run the story as well. So that's where we are. We also, by the way, we sent them on a final note, again, about reiterating this point of member engagement and member trust. We did make a commitment to send back the results, the individual results of each person who participated in the test. We are not able to say definitively whether or not that person has the actual antibodies to COVID-19. What we can say, however, is what we said was we can't make that absolute commitment because there is a degree of inaccuracy in the tests, particularly at the individual level. When you look at the overall population, the false positives, false negatives tend to cancel each other out, and it is quite accurate. But at the individual level, there's a higher degree of inaccuracy. And so what we decided to do, not to mislead anybody, was to provide a probability index that one has the antibodies. You're either a high, medium, low, or no, or highly unlikely probability that one has the antibody. People will be, they had a special code, they're going to go in and get their results privately. There's a whole bunch of consent and just sort of Canadian public health regulation that one has to go to when sharing this kind of information, which we really leave up to St. Mike's. That's not, that circumvents us and is dealt directly between the individual and St. Michael's Hospital and the University of Toronto. So with that, I'm going to, I guess, leave it open to any questions that may have come in, Eric, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have a couple that have come in already here. So thanks to folks who have written in with their questions. We'll integrate those into the chat. And if you do have other questions that come up, please do feel free to share those along and we'll get them into the conversation. I think for the sake of facilitation here, what I want to do is sort of chop up our discussion into three pieces and three themes of questions. The first one is around the question of representativeness. The second one is around some of the survey design issues involved in the monitor. And then the third, if we get a chance to dive into a few more details on the Sero survey work. So let's start off with this representative stuff, because this has come up already a couple of times in the chat with people wanting to understand the representativeness of the web panel a little bit more. So hopefully it's okay if I push on this issue a bit and ask some follow-up here. Let's start by addressing Bryn's question in the chat. He's curious to know how representative the panel is in terms of demographics, in terms of regionality and the like. I'm wondering if you could just give us a bit more information and speak to that.
Yeah, so there's two levels of representativity here. One is the overall panel, the 80,000 Canadians that are on the panel. That is more or less representative of the Canadian population, and we spend a lot of time ensuring that representativity. And we do that by ensuring that the population makeup based on primarily demographic and regional variables is checked against Census Canada data. So we use Census Canada data to ensure that we are within reasonable bounds of what the Canadian, that our panel is representative of what the Canadian population looks like from a demographic perspective. For those that are interested, by the way, what we do is my view, and I share this with Angus as well, is it all starts with geography. You need to get representativity across the entire country in all geographic regions. And if you get that right, that's the starting point, and then you build from that. To ensure that, and what the way that we do that is we break down the Canadian geography using federal ridings. And the reason we use federal political ridings is because there's really good Stats Can data at the riding level. So we're able to cross what we have in the panel against ridings. And we actually, and so that's sort of our principal geographic unit, if you will, is the federal political riding. And then we go from there and ensuring that we have, the numbers are representative of the age makeup of that riding, the income distribution of that riding, the education level of that riding, and so forth is represented in our panel. But we never really go to the entire panel. If we need a representative sample of something, the province of Ontario, men between the ages of 18 and 35, we go into the panel, we draw out a sample of that group, and we ensure that the representativity of that group, and we make sure that what we're collecting, that the data we collect at the end of the day is reasonably representative of the group that we're trying to reach. And then finally, the third piece of it is we will weight the data. We're very cautious when we weight the data. So if we're a little underrepresented by men in a particular age group, we'll weight the data, we'll weight up their responses a little bit. We're very cautious about weighting, only because you can torture data and make it tell you whatever you want. So we like to keep it as clean as possible, which is why we spend a lot of time on the representativity of the panel itself. So that in a nutshell is what we do. We set quotas always on region, age, gender, and more often than not education, which is turning out to be actually a very important variable of representativity for a whole host of reasons. Education is actually has certainly proven in the recent US election is a very good predictor and proxy for a whole bunch of other things that are more difficult to get at. The last thing I'll add is it's not just about demographics. We also need to make sure that we are representative attitudinally of the way Canadians think. We need conservatives, we need libertarians, we need liberals, because that is true of what's happening in the population. So we do spend quite a bit of time checking the attitudinal representativity of our panel, if that helps.
Yeah, and that comes to
a couple more points on that.
Go ahead, Dimitri.
Just to elaborate on what Ed was saying about the the political ridings, and it's not really only about capturing political sentiment. If you and we don't actually do each of the ridings individually. We actually have a proprietary way that we've amalgamated them strategically, and the reason is not only political, but we actually have found that by doing this the right way, it actually is a very good proxy for all sorts of socioeconomic, perceptual, other variables that we want to bring into the representativity is actually captured quite well by the by these ridings. The other thing I'll mention is that we always look to from a representative point of view. Ed's right. It's not only about demographics. The age, gender, region, which is always talked about, but with the respect to the ABC study that Ed's been talking about, we actually look back to secondary sources to see in what ways is our panel representative or not. And so after we did this study, we actually, as part of the study, we asked about some of the core morbidities. We talked about smoking, BMI. There was one other one that I'm
diabetes.
Diabetes, thank you. And then we matched that back to census data on this. And we found that the survey data that we got back on this ABC study matched up like bang on to what the census was saying, even though we never balanced specifically for those types of demographics. So when you get the building blocks right, it tends to line up a lot of the other important things that you're trying to measure as well.
Thanks so much. And I'll pass it to Bryn here, who has a couple of quick follow-up questions, and then I have a couple of my own too.
Thank you very much, Eric. And thank you to the speakers for a very interesting presentation. I know from 50 years of working in survey research that the representativeness issue is often, what's the way to put it, is often generalized in an enormous way. And for example, we can have a representative sample of the population, and yet we have an underrepresentation of marginalized populations, say racialized populations in metropolitan areas. And those same marginalized populations are the ones who have borne the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic. So does that throw a wrench somehow into what you're able to say, again, in general, about the way that people's reactions to the COVID pandemic have in fact, realized themselves over time?
The answer to that is yes. That is, it was a concern right from the beginning of the study. And there's two problems there. Is the populations of which you speak tend to have a lower digital access than the general Canadian population, which makes it more difficult for them to be members of the forum and to participate in this thing. Secondly, is the other problem there is language. There's often a case where English or French is not the first or second language of those populations, and so it tends to be difficult. Interestingly enough, the other crisis that occurred, by the way, right around COVID was the BLM and the racial issues that arose in the United States, and of course that were reflected here in Canada. When that happened, we very quickly went into our panel, and we knew the answer to this already, but tried to look at the underrepresented. For sure, we're underrepresented by many of those marginalized communities. And we wanted to sort of figure out by how much. Now, even though the panel overall, as I mentioned earlier, is underrepresented, we can still boost up those samples to get at what we need. But the idea was, so we actually went in and spent quite a bit of money and time trying to recruit into those populations to get those numbers up. And we did. And I can give you one example, visible minorities, for example, self-reported. Self-reported in Canada, which by the way does not include our Indigenous communities. StatsCan does not consider an Indigenous person a visible minority. So that's a separate group. And interestingly, by the way, many Indigenous individuals themselves, when asked, don't consider themselves visible minorities either. But that's another discussion. But nevertheless, the StatsCan number for visible minorities, self-identified visible minorities in Canada, I believe is around 22%. Our panel is 15%, or it was actually around 14-15%. So we're underrepresented by that group, which touches, I think, Brian, on a lot of what you're talking about. So we made a real effort to go into it, but you're right, there are challenges. Look, that group, lower language skills, higher to reach, first generation Canadians, so forth and so forth and so forth. So we do as best we can. We're very conscious of the problem, and we do as best we can to oversample in those groups to get it to be part of the overall makeup of the population. I will say one group that a marginalized group that has a COVID impact is the people of very low income, to put it bluntly, the poorest communities in Canada, which goes, even the homeless populations. We don't capture those groups. I mean, frankly, we just don't. And there are separate initiatives that are underway to understand what's happening within those populations that are added onto ours to try to come to a full picture. But Bryn, yeah, it's an issue, and it's one that we try and accommodate as best we can, but we do recognize it.
I'm curious to pick up on something you hinted at earlier there, which was the increasing recognition of education as an important variable for representativeness. I'm curious how your thoughts within the group have changed over the past years about what attributes we need to be representative on, and what new attributes you think are coming down the road. What are some of the features that we're going to need to be representative or paying attention to 5 years from now or 10 years from now as important things to be considering? Well,
I don't think, and Dimitri can comment on this as well, because Dimitri has a particular bent in public affairs. Look, I think that I think the core attributes are always the core attributes, but there's other things that we can always add to improve what's going on. The one that immediately comes to mind, particularly with what's going on south of the border, which is frankly also going on here, and we see it in a lot of our polling, is the politicization of people, and if a person of a particular point of view of a particular political persuasion, how they then automatically will think, for the most part, similarly on a wide variety of issues. We found that in the United States, the single best predictor, or there's two actually, of predictors of a person's political persuasion in the binary U.S. situation, Democrat versus Republican, is education and rural versus urban, where they live. Rural versus urban is becoming a very important distinction, and if you really go rural, urban, and suburban, is becoming increasingly important how people think, along with political persuasion, and just regionality in general is becoming ever more important. We are becoming a more polarized society, and I don't want to exaggerate the Canadian situation. The United States is far further down this road than we are by virtue of where one lives. But I'm going to turn over to Dimitri if he has any comments on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a very interesting time right now, and Bryn, I think you have like a very good perspective on this as well. That market research is really about the aggregate of what the entire population thinks, and if you look at our population dynamics, we still have a very white population. And if we're looking at issues like Black Lives Matter, within Canada, we're looking at populations, with between 3% and 6% in Canada. So all this to say that while we sort of need to change our mindset of what representative and what voices need to be amplified at this time, and it's one thing to say this is what Canadians think, but this is a time, and I think it's probably a time that's long overdue, that voices that have been silent in the LGBT community and the Black community, and points of view that were dismissed, I think it's incumbent on us and our community to amplify these voices and really make the effort to bring them to the table. And I think one of the other points to whether or not they're joining panels, it's yes, it is a little bit about comfort with language, it is a little bit about accessibility, but there's also a trust factor in there as well, and that people who join our forum, they do it to have a voice at the table. They know that they can have an influence on the they'll see their opinions reflected in press releases. They'll know that companies are listening to their point of view, and so there's a lot of these communities that we need to reach out and talk to these communities in a different way as we're recruiting them into the panel, to let them know that this is their time to have the seat at the table and that their voices are going to be heard. It's a tricky thing, and I think that we're all wrestling with it, and I can see that our company, in a pretty short amount of time, we've made some significant strides to move in that direction, and I'm happy to be part of that process. But it's an issue that we just need to keep challenging ourselves on.
Thanks, Dimitri. And I want to come back to that idea of amplification in just a minute here. But I am curious about one other aspect of representativeness that we've heard talked about in terms of web panels, and this is the idea of professional survey takers, for lack of a better term, people who become hyper interested in taking surveys and completing them, in the gamified aspects of these platforms. I'm curious how those kinds of selection effects play into who you get as a member of this panel, and how you're thinking about and trying to control for those in your research.
Yeah, so it's a good point. It's not a new issue. It's an issue that's been around digital research and panels for a while. So you begin with limiting the number of times a single individual can engage in surveys over the course of a time period. So we have very strict burden rules. We do this for two reasons. One is we don't want the same person answering all our surveys, and secondly, we don't want to bombard our members with multiple requests every week where their eyes glaze over every time someone comes in. So we very much control the number of surveys that any individual member is invited to participate in. The secondly is, you are right, there is a cohort of people, again, by the way, much worse in the United States than in Canada, that are members of multiple panels. And we know this to be true. There's a way we can see that there are people that there are of multiple panels across the board. So we try and control for that as much as we can. Having said that, there's been no definitive research that I'm aware of that's been done that says those people who answer more surveys than those who answer less surveys think any differently than others do. There's nothing in that fact that someone tends to be someone who enjoys doing research surveys is going to think differently by virtue of that fact. So that tends to be the common argument about it. But I think it's a question of controlling and managing the flow. And it comes back to one of the fundamental tenets that I said at the beginning, which is know who your respondents are. Frankly, most panel companies, I don't mean to, take shots at our competitors and so forth, but one of the reasons we did this is because we see this in the industry all the time. They have no idea who's answering their surveys. They're frankly, in many cases, their so-called panels are nothing better than a database of email addresses, most of which aren't even operable anymore. You can't even get a hold of these people. So that creates that becomes a cascading impact on research quality and ability to do things with any degree of accuracy. So it is the more that we can know about our members, the more that we can have some assurance that our members are in aggregate representative of that we maintain some degree of representativity in what we're doing. So so I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, it is an issue. I think the other thing, by the way, of known members is what I think is actually a worse problem than heavy survey participants is fake participants. To the point where they're not even, I mean, let's forget about, you think you're surveying an oncologist and it's a 16-year-old in his basement in Hong Kong. It is more about, it's actually not even live people. That you have bots that are automatically filling out surveys. And we have controls that we can put in place to check quality. An obvious one is you just ask an open-ended question, which of the following 5 pictures is not a dog? And things like that. And when we do buy sample, which we have to do on occasion because we need to top up or whatever, and we check it, it is shocking how many of those so-called completed interviews are actually completely nonsense. It's not a live person, or if it's a live person, they're not paying any attention to the questions. They're just running through it as quickly as they can. That to me is actually a bigger issue than heavy survey users.
Yeah, really important point. So, Bryn, I know you had one quick follow-up question here, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try and make it very quick because it's an extremely interesting issue. You've got 27 waves of respondents, some of whom you can track across the various phases. And analytically, what one might then think of immediately is doing some sort of panel analysis or a multi-level model type of analysis where you account for the fact that you've got repeat respondents in effect.
Yeah.
And sorry, is the question about sort of doing a longitudinal type analysis and to understand where they sit on COVID issues over a period of time, or
that's right. Yeah, that's what I'm after, because with a panel survey, especially over 27 panels, you've got a number of repeat persons, and they will effectively bias whatever you might like to plot as being level of concern over time and so on. And so accounting for that bias is extremely important from an analytical perspective.
Yeah, I think the nature of the survey tends to be, much more behavioral in terms of, what are you doing every day? I think that to a degree lends itself to less bias. I mean, I understand that we're dealing with less of a random sample here. But I'm less concerned about it from a behavioral perspective, and we tend to have, on the perception front, I agree that that there could be a bias because say you're doing like an agreement battery and saying I don't know, COVID is overblown or COVID is a hoax. Well, now you're right. You've entered that idea in the early phases. So now that you've planted that seed, what happens to the individual over time? And you're right, there's some analysis that could be done there just to see whether or not the degree of the change, and we can actually follow that change when it comes to whether the health threat is overblown. It actually aligns very well with the case count in Canada, that trend. But you're right, I think there's a really interesting analysis that can be done among the people who have seen that survey more than once and the people who are seeing it at the time. But from a behavioral perspective, I would think that the amount would be minimal. I mean, unless we're planting the idea of, how often are you baking, and then they get the idea, well, maybe I should start baking.
And Bryn,
Well, yeah.
Bryn, also, we do have exclusions, right? So when we do tracking work, we will exclude, so we'll have a unique sample for a period of weeks or months or whatever the time periods are to ensure that we don't get the same people every wave. Now,
Okay.
having said that, you are right. There are people in there who've done this survey now 3 or 4 times. I thought you were going to go to, there's a really interesting analysis to look at those people who've answered, over, every 2 months and see what the change in their behavior has been. That kind of lines you, and you're right.
That's what I meant.
That is actually would be really cool to do.
Yeah.
And if Dimitri and I had a little extra time to play around with that and not servicing our clients, we probably would do it, and maybe we will. But yes, you're right. That would be a very powerful analysis to do. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we're coming towards the end of our time, and as has become the tradition in these sessions, I think I have to finish with a lightning round of 3 questions and hopefully 1 or 2 sentence answers from Dimitri and Ed to wrap this up. And I want to talk about the content of the surveys and the lessons that you've learned in that. So the first lightning round question that I want to ask is just, what have you learned in terms of best practices and insights about how to ask these kinds of predictive questions? Earlier, you hinted at the challenge of asking people about their future behavior, asking people about what they plan to do. I'm curious what you've learned through this process. Do you have any insights about how to do that better, or things you're doing differently now thanks to the experience you have?
Yeah, on say something like the predictive behavior, and that sort of, you need to sort of line it up with what happened in the past and what people are currently doing. And that's where the problem gets in is these are already what I've said, what have you done in the past? What are you doing now? What are you doing in the future? And so just jumping right to, what like, how often do you think you're going to do this in the future, which, respondents already, like, beyond COVID scenario, that's already a bit of a nightmare trying to get at what people are going to do at the future. But, it really, I would say the lesson is really about trying to, don't try to do a huge battery and try to, like, keep things nice and simple. It's all about simplicity, because, respondents they don't think on those terms to think, okay, this is how much I did it in the past and the future. So you sort of ground it and you say, how often are you doing it right now? And you might have to, input some extra very basic questions, not too many metrics in there. And then after that, after you've grounded them and say, okay, and then you remind them the next time, you say, okay, you're doing it this much right now. And then layering on sort of the additional metric of, what do you think you're going to be doing in the future? So, you really have to take respondents and you really have to, be conscious of their experience and take them along a path, rather than, there's obviously clever ways where you can jam as many metrics into a question, and you can, break it out in a lot of ways. But if the respondent isn't really following along, or if they don't naturally react that way to questions, then the data is for nothing. So I would say, like, keeping it simple, grounding them and saying, okay, what is the behavior that's happening right now, and even though you don't need the data for that question, and then building on that stepwise to get them to the next step of, what are you doing in the future? So that's my briefer answer. Thanks.
Okay, lightning round number 2 of 3. Is, you hinted earlier at the challenge of prioritizing different questions, right? The vast number of things you want to ask about versus what you can under these constraints. You just talked about how critical it is to keep it short. So I'm curious if you have a sense of a time when you've done that really well, and a time where you really wish you had done those priorities differently, and what you learned from that.
And I'll comment really quickly. And we do a lot of work with academic institutions, people with grant money, that sort of thing on academic work. The thing that I've learned in the last year, and by virtue of some analysis that we did, is the degree of data deterioration that occurs when either during the length of the overall survey or the length of a particular question is actually quite stunning. So for example, if you have an attitudinal bank, do you agree or disagree, or or on a 5-point scale, agree, disagree with the following statements? If you have a bank of 15 or 20 statements, you can forget about the data after the 7th or 8th statements, because people just get so frustrated and bored with that question. And this is something I got to keep reiterating, not academics, yes, clients, yes, everybody, yes. You cannot ask somebody with any reliability to go through 20 items and answer for each one of those items. By the time they get to the 15th or 16th, I'm telling you, it's crap data. I would not rely on it. From what I've seen, I wouldn't do it. So Eric, it just comes back to simple, short, to the point questions that are written, frankly, grammatically well, and that people understand what's going on. I think it comes back to those basics, because I can tell you, we do not do any surveys for the market research industry. If another research company comes to us and asks us to do a survey, we flat out refuse to do it. And the reality is, I hate to say it as a 25-year-old practitioner of this, is because so much of those surveys are such unbelievable crap. And there's just such a terrible experience for people to go through that we do not want our members to do it, because we don't want our members to churn out of our panel. We want to keep tenure is very important to us. So that is, if I have one key lesson, certainly in the last year, that we've learned by virtue of our academic work and a lot of the COVID work we've done, is really restrain yourself from trying to cram everything into one questionnaire.
So Dimitri, I'll give you the last lightning round here then with that. Sure. What do you know now that you had wished you knew at the beginning, or like Ed just answered, what's the sort of biggest lesson of your COVID tracking experience here?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I've learned is like, I wish all this stuff that I'm studying on an ongoing basis right now, I wish I knew that this was all coming down the pipe, and I wish I had like this bank of baseline data. And I'll give you just a very quick example. I had a client that was doing a study about, they wanted to do a release on prioritizing the way that they prioritize their finances. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and it would have been a bad idea to release that study. Now, 10 months later, they're sitting in the driver's seat, because they've actually got really fascinating baseline data to say, this is how people used to prioritize their finances. And now they can rerun the same study to say, this is how people are prioritizing now. And that's a really interesting thing that's coming out of it. I mean, there's, I wish that whole data set that I had right now, I wish I had a baseline for all of it. So yeah, I mean, planting seeds and trying to, predict the future, that's the whole game there.
Well, thank you so much. With that, unfortunately, we do need to wrap up. And this represents the wrap up for our season of 2020 COVID survey method working group calls. We will be back in 2021 with more of these. We have a set of really fascinating speakers already, and I'll be reaching out to the group with updates about that in the coming weeks. But for now, let me just say thank you so much to both of our guests for your willingness to talk and share today. Very fascinating stuff. And to everyone who joined, thanks so much for being here, whether on the Zoom call, watching live on YouTube, or watching the recording later on. Great to connect. Stay safe, take care.